Welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a review and deep dive of the recently released Immortals of Aveum. So let's start off with a little background on the game. The first time I saw anything about this was a trailer in April of this year, and it looked incredible. It was a first-person shooter that used magic instead of guns. And I thought that was a really neat concept. The trailer that they showed made the game look absolutely amazing. As a huge fan of the first-person shooter genre, the trailer got me really excited for the release of this game. And what's even better is that it promised to release just a mere 3 months later in July. I was so excited that I immediately pre-ordered the game. Yeah, it was delayed a month, which kind of put it in a little predicament because there was a heavily anticipated game coming to Xbox maybe a week or so after its delayed release date. But nevertheless, I was hell-bent on getting my hands on this game and beating it as soon as I could. So without further ado, let's dive into the different aspects of this game. To start out, we'll talk about the good. What does this game do well? This game does really well with the combat loop. I found it really engaging and fun. There's basically 3 different types of magic that you cycle through. You have the green magic, which acts as a rapid-fire SMG. You have the blue magic, which is more like a pinpoint rifle that you can use for distance shot. And then you have the red magic, which is like a shotgun burst that does heavy damage up close. So the gunplay, or finger gunplay as you would have it, they did really well. It is very satisfying to use, it's very effective. You have your short range weapons, you have your special abilities that you can use to break shields or just take down enemy health, and then you can get up and close and personal and use some melee attacks. It really irks me when games don't have a melee option, but this one does, and the melee option is really powerful. Unlike Doom Eternal, where you can only use it when an enemy is down in a down state, the melee actually works every time here. For the most part, when I play a game for the first time, I usually approach it on the normal difficulty. I find the combat loop to be more engaging and more effective, and I don't like it when my enemies are tanks. I also like having a little bit of power behind my punches, so to say. For Immortals of Aveum, I decided to start out on the highest difficulty, which is the Immortal difficulty. I didn't find it to be crazy difficult, but I found it to be pretty fun. I do like to have the ability to cheese my more difficult enemies in games. I found this game to have plenty of instances where I could do that, where I found a difficult enemy and I could defeat him with a single blow. There are plenty of opportunities to do this in this game, and I just get a huge kick out of having a super strong enemy and being able to knock them off an edge and have them die instead of just, keep coming back for more. Another thing this game excels at is environmental variety. There are a lot of different vistas, and all of them are absolutely gorgeous. One of the more impressive environmental settings was on the side of a ship. I don't know if you can call it a ship really, it's more of a giant walking being that serves as a boat. But it was one of the more impressive scenes that I came across in this game. The only limiting factor of this level is that a lot of the battles occur inside the ship rather than on this beautiful outdoor setting. One of the common complaints I've seen about this game is the lack of enemy variety. I didn't have any issues with this. I actually found the enemies to be pretty varied. You had your common foot soldiers, you had your lieutenants who were more powerful mages, and then you had your mini bosses, which were giant creatures that took several shots and a lot of different tactics to take down. My favorite mission in this game was actually this raid that you do with a group of mages, and it just felt super awesome being on the actual battlefield and fighting alongside other mages. For the most part, Jack, the main character, engages enemies as an individual and completes missions on his own. So I thought this was a breath of fresh air where I had allies to back me up. In addition to the breathtaking environments, there's also really cool effects, like pulling an enemy in, shotgunning him, and having that body residue just linger there for a little bit. And finally, this game handles boss battles really well. I found all the bosses pretty fun to fight. You start out strong by fighting a dragon in the very beginning. This dragon was really fun to fight. You could actually cheese him a little bit by hiding in this corner, but it was a super engaging and fun battle right off the bat. Throughout the game, you'll come across shroud fanes, and these shroud fanes typically contain upgrades, like a health upgrade or a mana upgrade. Some of them even contain specialized spells. Later on in the game, you'll encounter the Six, which are really powerful wizards or mages that you have to take down in order to get an achievement. These guys are capable of one-shotting you. I was able to build Jack up toward the end and level him up enough to take one out. Those were really fun, but now it's time to move on to the bad. What does this game do that could be improved upon? Not necessarily game-breaking glitches, but glitches that can be irritating, effects that can kind of slightly break your immersion but not completely take you out of it. One of the more common and possibly less frustrating bugs you'll come across in Immortals is clipping. A lot of times the enemies will get knocked through walls like the walls aren't even there. Again, it doesn't really break the game, it's just slightly annoying that they're able to move through geometry like that. It happened several times on my playthrough, not really game breaking like I said. A slightly less common but slightly more annoying bug you'll come across in Immortals of Aveum is collision detection, especially when the enemies are colliding with your character. Occasionally the collisions won't register and the enemies will end up glitching out, which I found to be pretty annoying. Several times I also ran into a glitch or a bug where the enemies would stop reacting. They weren't dead, but they would suddenly freeze or lock up and completely forget what they were doing. It made for easy kills, but it definitely broke the immersion a little bit, especially when the enemy is not moving at all. And then sometimes these little guys' legs twitch kind of weirdly, but I don't know if that's a bug or that's by design. One of the more irritating aspects of the game that annoyed me probably more than it should have was the enemy movement or the NPC movement. Especially in the beginning, it's a lot of jerky twisting around, and then you have enemies that kind of glide across the surface, and I felt like it could have been done a lot better. One of my main complaints is the story. I found it to be very shallow, just like the main character Jack. After the introduction, your character undergoes shotgun training, where he learns the 3 basic magic spells. He is then sent off to fight on the front lines of the Ever War. The missed opportunity here is that your character was fighting on the front lines of the Ever War for 5 years. We didn't see any of those battles, we didn't get to experience that with him, the character did not learn any new spells over the course of 5 years, and did not mature at all. This also reminds me of the movie Thank You for Smoking, where the main character approaches a movie producer and offers him money to have a good guy character smoke a cigarette in the film. Here we are in this brand new, fantastical, magic-filled world, completely different than our own, and we have the main character smoking a cigarette. This felt tacked on. This felt like the creators of the game were approached by a cigarette manufacturing company and offered money to include the use of cigarettes in their game. It felt inorganic, it felt cheap, it felt tacked on. There are only 2 cutscenes in the game that depict the use of cigarettes, and they both feel unnatural and inorganic. We talked about the good, we talked about the bad, now it's time to talk about the ugly, and these are the parts in the game that completely break the immersion. One of the most significant and biggest offenses that occurs in this game is the lack of graphic fidelity. There are several instances where things just don't load properly. There are several instances where the graphics completely break, and instead of a smooth spell, you get a blocky displacement of artifacts. This has happened more than one occasion. This is probably an easy fix. They can probably go back and fix this with updates, but it was just really disappointing. I also ran across broken game mechanics on several occasions. This ranged from in-game notifications that would pop up and block your screen and you had trouble removing them, to the ever-present chest opening disaster. Basically, you had to be really pinpoint accurate when you're opening chests, otherwise you'd use a mana crystal. Can't tell you how many I used just trying to get these chests open. I also had multiple instances where I was unable to reload my hand cannon. Basically, I would melee somebody and the reload animation would not trigger, and I wasn't able to reload until I switched magic powers. I also ran into enemies that wouldn't die, or if they did die, they wouldn't disappear, so you would waste time and energy trying to kill an enemy that was already dead. Aside from that, you had actual clipping of the environment as well. There were some instances where I went through walls. Luckily, I didn't get stuck, but I still found it to be really immersion breaking. I mean, this is a linear game. You should be able to have environments that are functioning properly. One of the worst experiences I had was getting kicked from the game multiple times. The first occurrence happened 5 minutes into the game. The first cutscene completed, I walked 5 steps and then was completely kicked out of the game, back to the home screen of the Xbox. It then happened again a couple hours later where I had this blue trippy effect. Couldn't get rid of it, tried jumping down to reload, didn't work, ended up getting kicked back to the home screen again. As much as I had anticipated this game, I found this really disappointing. In my 40-hour playthrough of Redfall, I was only kicked from the game twice. In this game, in all, after 27 hours, I was kicked about 7 or 8 times. Usually I'm pretty forgiving, especially if my save doesn't delete, but it was just really frustrating to have this happen twice in 2 hours. And now, to move on to our final section. The verdict. Is it worth the $70 price tag that comes along with this game? Well, that depends on you. Are you an avid fan of first-person shooters? If so, then I would say yes, I had a lot of fun with this game, despite the many flaws that I encountered. That being said, despite the beautiful vistas, the world kind of felt empty and unlived in. Yes, there were remnants of villages, but there was nothing else. There weren't any objects lying around to tell of times past. In other words, there wasn't much depth in the world around you. I also didn't like how they handled water. I think it felt antiquated, where you fall into the water, you fade to black, lose some health, and come back on the side of the bank. While the aspect of a gunless, magic-infused first-person shooter is unique, the uniqueness kind of stops there. There isn't much depth to the gameplay, and it feels like a generic first-person shooter other than the use of magic. I in no way, shape, or form regret the purchase of this game. Now that being said, if this game came out on Game Pass first, I probably wouldn't have bought it after I beat it. On the other hand, the game Redfall impressed me, which isn't the common consensus that you see around, but I found Redfall to be deeper and more inspiring than this game. So now we'll go over my final score. Overall, I'd give this game an objective score of 6.5 and a subjective score of 6.0. It's fun, but I've had better. Now, the approach I took in rating this game and giving that score of 6.5 and 6.0 was kind of similar to the way a professor approaches grading an English paper. Now, the abundance of grammatical errors, which is symbolized by the minor bugs and glitches in this game, were too numerous to give it an A. That, in combination with poor sentence structure, we'll call that the major immersion-breaking bugs and glitches, were too significant to give it a B. Now, the reason I couldn't bring myself to give this game a C was because it kind of felt like that paper that was handed in that was almost a direct copy of another person's paper. Sure, it changed the helicopters to dragons and it changed the bullets to magic spells, but it never really rose above that. It really didn't differentiate itself from the other plethora of first-person shooters that we have in the market today. So a great concept that never fully realized its potential. Thanks for watching my review of Immortals of Aveum. Now stick around if you want to see some spoilers, otherwise click away. So there were a couple story elements that really frustrated me. One of them toward the end, and the other one is the very end. So this scene has awesome build-up. You finally defeat this big boss guy. He drops his thing. I'm like, okay, here we go. We're gonna fuck shit up. We're gonna tear this guy a new one. And it has all this build-up to have a great scene, and here we go.
This is for Devin.
What? You kicked him? That's it? Kicked him to the void? I could have seen that in FIFA. In another one, at the very end, Jack actually ends up sacrificing himself to save the realm. Really powerful moment in the game, and it felt like it had some impact. But then they kind of reneged on that, and he was alive, and it kind of felt cheap. It kind of felt unearned, like it really didn't have any impact on the world whatsoever.